So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm here with several of my colleagues, including Dr. Ella August. Ella and I will be presenting today. My name is Gurpreet Rana. You can also call me Preet. And we're going to be talking about selecting a target journal for your research. So tomorrow is Halloween, and what you see on the right side of your screen is a pumpkin, which is something we carve pumpkins here during Halloween, and we put lights in them. And this is a photograph of a pumpkin that Ella has carved. So we thought it would be appropriate to share because tomorrow being Halloween. Moving forward, what we want to do is give you an introduction. What we are emphasizing is that anything we present today, it's really important for you to go forward and review and investigate on your own as well. The first thing we're going to be doing is finding journals in your field. What is the process? What are some strategies for doing that? Secondly, we're going to choose, how should you consider choosing a journal for your work, for your research? And time permitting, we'll go into avoiding predatory journals. This may be something we might hold off for another time. And all of the links on that we are presenting are available on the CIRHT Resource Guides Scientific Writing and Resources section. And if you notice on this slide, there is a link at the very bottom of the slide where you can find the link to those resources. Okay, so let's get started looking at this. First thing, looking at finding journals in your field. So before we begin, I want to see if we can show you this brief video.
You've done your research and are ready to publish. Sharing your results with the world is key to the progress of your discipline and to your career. Publishing your work with an untrustworthy journal has the potential to damage your career. With the number of journals growing at around 3.5% annually, and almost 1,000 new journals launching in 2014 alone, how can you choose a trusted journal for your research? Think, check, submit. Before you decide, step 1. Think. Can I trust this journal with my research? Do I need more information before I can decide that this is a trusted journal? Step 2. Check. Does the journal publish research that you would read yourself? Can you tell which organisation publishes the journal? Can you contact them easily if you need to? Does the journal have editorial policies in place? And do they conduct appropriate peer review? Does it charge publication fees? And are they clear about how much they cost? Do you know the names or reputations of any of the editorial board members? Are articles in the journal indexed in any of the services that you use? Step 3. If you can answer yes to most of these questions, then submit. By following these 3 steps, you can identify which journals will reliably publish your work and make an impact in your field. When you finish your next article, remember to think, check, then submit. Check the website for more tips to help you find a trusted journal for your work.
The Think, Check, Submit process is something that has been developed by this organization, and you can actually go to the website thinkchecksubmit.org, and the think portion allows you to think about publishing your research results is key. So what are some of the issues that you need to reflect upon as you're doing that? Right here, we have the Think, Check, Submit checklist. And there's a link here, and you can see some of the questions we were just thinking about when we were looking at that last video. Do you or your colleagues know the journal? Can you easily identify and contact the publisher? If you can't, there might be something suspicious about the journal. Is the journal clear about the type of peer review it uses? Are articles indexed in services that you personally use? And is it clear what fees will be charged? So going through this list, you can think a little more about what it is that you need. So to begin with, factors to consider. Now, these are some of them. When you're thinking about a journal, you've done an amazing research, amazing work, and you want to get all that you can out of it. So questions you ask yourself is, who is your intended audience? If you're working in OB-GYN, of course, you're not dermatologists, so you want to make sure that you are looking at a set of journals that, let's say, those working in OB-GYN may investigate. Also, what type of level of peer review is being done? And Ella will be looking at that in a little bit. One thing that's so important, your research needs to be findable. How do you find research articles? Well, one of the ways you do it is when you search databases like Medline, Pubmed. So you want to find a journal that is available, let's say, in Pubmed, or in Web of Science, or one of the major indexing databases. Also thinking about the editor and the editorial board and looking at who they are and the individuals, what their reputation is. Is there contact information for those individuals? Publication fees. Do not get stuck with hidden publication fees, and that is something that you really want to investigate. The journal publishing cycle, how quickly, how much time does it take for acceptance rate and for communication with you? And if you want a large group of individuals across the world and in sub-Saharan Africa, including in your region, if you want to guarantee access for them, are you looking for open access? And if you are, how do you identify if the journal that you are submitting to is an open access journal? Yolanda, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but is there anything else that you particularly would emphasize?
I also, I guess, look at the journals that I am generally reading. Right. And look at the journals that I'm referencing in my manuscript. Right.
Thank you for that. So we're going to look at some selected tools. In addition to, of course, what Yolanda just mentioned about investigating what are you reading. What are some tools for us to investigate that? And we may not go through all of these today, but along the top are list of directories where you will find where journals are indexed. Also, the directory of open access journals, often referred to as DOAJ, will also give you additional information on those. So we're going to go through some of those. Along the bottom of underneath the image of Think, Check, Submit, what those are different tools that allow us to investigate what is available. And some of these tools are free, but there are aspects of the resource that are not free. So we want to be cautious and make sure we're showing you the free content and the content that we've evaluated. Ella is going to show us Jane and GH Journal Search, so we're going to look at the first three in the section that we're looking at now. So this is, I'm just showing you screenshots because it's a little easier. This is DOAJ, or Directory of Open Access Journals. It has a lot of interesting news about scholarly publishing, browsing and subjects, a lot of different questions you may have as you go through open access publishing. But let's say we were to focus on, we wanted to do a search here. And if you notice from the first screen, I have entered in the search term contraception. And there are two options under the search box. If you see that, it says journals and it says articles. I turned off the articles and I just want to see journals that have the keyword contraception in the title, maybe in the description. I did not do an advanced search here. So when I do that search, you see journals that are coming up. I also limited, using some of the features on the left side of the screen, I limited to English language only. I could also look at article processing charges. I could limit those to the ones that don't have article processing charges and are open access. I could look at the different types of peer review. Is it double blind? What are the different aspects of peer review? What is the journal license? What is the specific subject? I just went for English. And we're pulling up 5 open access journals. Some of these may be known to you. And you do see additional information along the side. So the very first one, Open Access Journal of Contraception, you see additional information about that journal. And on the right side, there's a green check mark. And below that, it says APC 1780 USD. The article processing charge for that journal is $1,780. Open access is not a free model, and that's something that we need to discuss. However, that being said, always look at an article, at a journal's instructions to authors. Very often, publishers will either waive or decrease the fee, the article processing fee for open access journals from individuals who are submitting from developing countries. So that's something to keep in mind, always. So here's an example of one of the journals I've pulled up, Contraception and Reproductive Medicine. It gives me, I can link right into where I can start the submission. Now, do you see where it says under publication charges? That's on the right side of the page. Right here where it says waiver policy. And that's what I was talking about when I was referring to specifically, is there a waiver for particular reasons? And one of those reasons might be for authors from developing countries. So you also see the editorial information, the aims and the scopes of the journal. Is it the right one for you? So I'm just going to move forward here. So that's one of the tools we're looking at. And you will find a link as well to the NLM catalog. So what does that mean? NLM is a tool, is a catalog, and the NLM stands for National Library of Medicine. And interestingly enough, in the United States, the U and the E is removed from the word catalog. We don't know why. I'm Canadian. When I moved to the US, I had to also remove those 2 letters. Maybe some of our colleagues can explain why, but you know, for someone who has a master's in library science, it was rather shocking to me that I had to remove the U and the E, but there it is. So the NLM catalog will allow us to find out what is indexed in PubMed. So I typed in the journal, the Ethiopian Journal of Health Sciences, and some of you may be very familiar with this journal, and I did a search for it. And the National Library of Medicine tells me so much about this journal. It's semi-annual. So the frequency of a journal may be of interest to you. It also tells us when did it start. But what I'm focusing on right now is current indexing. Where can you find it if you were to do a search on it? It is found in Medline, otherwise known as PubMed. So that means that if any of your colleagues were to do a research, a good literature search in Medline, they would find it. Because not only are you thinking about where you're publishing, you're thinking about who is looking at your work, who is citing your work, the impact your work is making in the profession. So that's another quick look at another tool. Again, I'm going through the tools that I was showing you on that first screen. And these are just some selected ones that I evaluated and thought were helpful. So some of you may be aware of Science Citation Index, or Web of Science. It's an interdisciplinary, a very broad set of journals that are available, just like they are available in Medline. And one thing that we want to focus on with Web of Science or Science Citation Index is that it's if you have a journal in here, it's actually a very good thing to have it here, because again, it makes your work so much more findable. The issue, for instance, if it was in a very, very tiny database that people don't search, it might not be findable. Also, and I'm not going to go through this, but Web of Science has a link at the bottom of the search box where it says already have a manuscript. It gives you some options to match your manuscript using your abstract or the title keywords to journals they might suggest. And there are different programs like this. One of them happens to be Web of Science. Another one is in EndNote, and I'm not showing you the new EndNote one because not all of us use EndNote. So we're going to hold that. There are manuscript matchers, but we may look at that at another time. So I'm going to do a search, and if you notice, if you can see the screen there, it's a little small, but I've typed in the word midwifery, just to search all journals for the keyword midwifery. This is the master journal list for Science Citation Index or the Web of Science Core Collection. I would want my work to be cited here. So the very first one in this list after I do the search is the exact match. There is an exact match. Elsevier, a publisher, has a journal called Midwifery. But there are other journals with the word midwifery in them. One of them being the African Journal of Nursing and Midwifery. Also, along the right-hand side, the left-hand side of the screen, we see options for filters. Do we only want to see open access? Do we want to look at coverage in specific databases? Do we want to see specific frequency or impact factors or countries of origin? So you can even take a really large list and narrow it down. So here's an example. I haven't gone necessarily into the profiles here, but actually you can view the profile page. It just requires a free account setup. So it does not cost anything to look at the profile, but you would have to go in and put in your own email address and other information to see the larger profile for those journals. Not so dissimilar from the profile, let's say, we saw from the directory of open access journals.
So what exactly does the profile page show? What information?
The profile page is going to give us more information, not dissimilar, like article processing. So a lot of the things on the where you see the filters?
Yeah.
So, is it covered in Web of Science? Is it open access? What category is it? What region? Language, it's going to give you that type of overarching view. And the reason I didn't show it is because we do have some of those aspects in the filter, and I want to keep us moving. But I'm happy to show that if we
I
do
always
have
learn
time.
so much when I'm
great.
webinars.
I have to tell you that I learned a lot when I was preparing for this, because this is not something that I teach in every single day, right?
It's probably constantly changing.
Right, and so I have to tell you, I've learned a great deal from my colleagues, my fellow librarians in the field in various institutions. SciMago is another tool. It's freely available. It is a division of Elsevier, from what I understand. And again, you can look at journal ranks, country ranks of, let's say, what is the country rank for Canada for their publication impact of the entire country's research. I don't know if that would be helpful. But so I'm going to do a search in here in SciMago, and I did a search for contraception. And when I did, I come up with all these journals with the phrase contraception in them. I went to the very first link, which is just contraception. It's a journal from Elsevier, and many of us are familiar with it. And I'm proud to say that some of us on the call have actually published there, I believe. And here we go. Whoops. So this is what I see, and it's a rather small, but what you're seeing is the country, the subject, the publisher, the scope. Now, what we are also getting is a number in the top right, what we call the H index. And I don't want to confuse you too much, but that means that 92 at the minimum 92 articles from this journal have been published 92 times or more. And it also gives you other measures, total citations from this journal. And again, we're not going to get into some of the weeds here, but just to know that, and we can go over more of the idea of citation metrics at another day, because that's a whole nother story. But you can see some of the citation metrics here, and they also will have definitions of what those mean. Now, I'm going to show you Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, just for comparison. Remember that contraception is a very important journal in OB/GYN and in family planning. It has an H index of 92, and it is a very significant journal. So why does JAMA have an H index of 622? We are not comparing apples and oranges. JAMA is a general database that so many people read, so many people index and cite. Therefore, articles from JAMA have been cited at least 622 articles from JAMA have been cited at least 622 times or more. Now, that doesn't mean that contraception is just not as important. It just means that dermatologists are not citing contraception.
It's narrower.
It's narrower. Yeah. So we are not comparing apples and oranges here. We're not going to compare JAMA or Nature when we compare it to publishing it in contraception. And I think we understand that focus, but it's important to remember. I might skim through this one. This is another free one. This happens to be a fee-based editing service. However, they have a free journal selector, and you can search again by just do a general search. You can do a search of words from your abstract and find a journal that might be appropriate in that way. They do have a YouTube video you can see to learn more. And again, I'm only using the free versions of this. So I cheated, and I took a journal that was published from our colleagues at St. Paul's, and I put their abstract into the eDance journal selector. I put this abstract for this article, Women's Satisfaction with Intrapartum Care in St. Paul's Hospital, Millennium Medical College, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Some of you may be familiar with this institution. I hope you are, since some of you are sitting there. Now let's see what they recommend. And you notice that that is in BMC pregnancy and childbirth. Well, they recommend BMC pregnancy and childbirth. So whoever made the suggestion made a good one. You notice that on the right side, there are options for me to filter my results. I did filter my results for open access only. I have a checkbox beside that. And that's why I'm getting some open access journals. Usually you want to copy and paste your own abstract in so you're not plagiarizing someone else's, like I did. And you'll notice that in the drop-down box, I changed it from general keyword to abstract, manuscript abstract. Please note that these are not, it might come up with a really strange suggestion based on the abstract words. So buyer beware. You still want to see the scope of the journal. You still want to do your due diligence when you're making these choices. I'm going to skip over journal guide just so we have some time. Ella has some great things to talk about. Again, it's just another tool to find information. It also is a fee-based editing service. I would not necessarily recommend using it, but I would recommend investigating the free journal selector. So again, looking at the journals it chooses and it gives you the impact factor of those. It also gives you the cost, their policies. and in some cases, the speed in which they will accept your paper or they'll respond to you. So I'm going to now have Ella, if you'd like, I can move this over to you.
All right. Thank you, Preet, for that. I learned a lot. Super interesting. Okay. So I'm going to cover 4 strategies for selecting a target journal using an example. This is actually a published article. So I borrowed it, just like Preet did in her previous slide.
We don't encourage that.
So let's say that you wrote a paper, Husband's Involvement in Family Planning Use and its Associated Factors in Pastoralist Communities of Afar, Ethiopia. And I'm going to cover 4 strategies. I think that you could easily swap out some of the strategies that Preet just covered for these 4 or add them. The first strategy is to look at where similar articles are being published. And again, we just got some ideas about different resources you can use to get at this question. So for the first strategy, what you can do is enter your keywords for your paper into a database and just basically look at what comes up in the results. So you can use a variety of databases. In this example, I use Pubmed Central. All of the articles in Pubmed Central are accessible at no cost and are available with full text. So in this example, I accessed Pubmed Central through the research guide that I believe Preet set up.
It's the CIRHT resource guide.
The CIRHT resource guide. And the website address to get to this page is on the bottom of the slide. So how you can access Pubmed Central is to click Open Access Journals on the left. And you'll see this menu come up. I think it's on the right side of the screen. And there is the link for Pubmed Central. And then simply type in keywords from your article. So as a reminder, this is the title of the article we're using as an example. And you can try different sets of keywords from your article. This is just an example that I put together based on the actual keywords from this article in PubMed. So you could see the keywords I used for this article are contraception behavior, family planning services, and health knowledge attitudes practice. That might not be the most ideal search, and again, I encourage you to try different combinations of keywords to see what you come up with. So then you'll get a list of results based on the keywords that you type into the database, and simply just look at what journals come up in the results. And those are potential journals that you could use for your article, because those are journals that are publishing articles with the keywords that describe your paper. The second strategy is something that Yolanda mentioned earlier, is to simply look in your own reference list of your paper, see what kind of articles and what kind of journals you're citing in your own reference list. So in this example paper, I have pasted a screenshot of the references from this paper, and you can see contraception and reproductive medicine, BMC Public Health, PLOS One. And so these could all be potential homes or target journals that you choose for your own paper. The third strategy Preet mentioned before is to use a search tool called Jane Journal Author Name Estimator, and the website address is there at the top of the screen. This is what Jane looks like. When you go to the website, you'll have a blank box, and you can paste in your title and abstract into this box and click, I have a little arrow here at some point, click Find Journals, and then you will be presented with a list of journals that could be good target journals for your work. It looks like this, and you can see on the list are reproductive health, BMC research notes, +1, BMC women's health. So there's a little bit of overlap between what we saw here and what we saw in some of the other strategies. And
I will say that Jane is the one that has been around for quite some time.
Okay.
And it is trusted as well.
The fourth tool is to use, it's Global Health Journal Search. It's another search tool. It's a menu-driven website, and the website address is at the top of the slide. And it looks like this. There are a list of categories at the top of the screen, and you can select a category. In this case, I selected reproductive health and click on that. You can also filter your results by open access, availability. There are also some other filters available on the website which you can experiment with. But when you choose a category on this website, you will get a list of journals again. And you can see on this list is BMC Women's Health, that's number 5, and number 4 is BMC Pregnancy and Childbirth. We also saw these journals listed in some of the other results from the other strategies that we used. So I would suggest using at least 4 strategies and then kind of comparing what journals that you see come up in the results of each strategy. And if 1 or 2 journals are coming up, with all the strategies you use, that's probably a good indicator that might be a good fit for your journal, for your paper.
Oh, we have a question, Ella.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, under Jane, what article influence values indicate for us?
Yeah.
I guess under Jane search, it's not clear. Could you go back to the slide about Jane?
Did you want to speak to this, Pri? You probably have a good...
I wanted to understand the question a little better.
I think on the right, you'll see it.
It's not clear what the influence values mean in that one column.
So I don't recall, but I do know that there's a little question mark, and that is the last time I used Jane, I clicked on that, and that cleared it for me. And what it likely is, it's an impact, it's a citation metric.
Yeah.
And it's not a citation metric that I use a lot. It's not a very common one, but it may be one about the article influence, and it may be a combination of using alternative metrics and impact factor. But if you click on that little question mark, there's a little blue dot. And you just pulled it up for me, and I will read it. It says the article influence measures how often articles in the journal are cited within the first 5 years after its publication. These citations are weighted based on the influence of the journals from which citations are received. Being cited in the article in Science can boost a journal's article influence more than being cited in an article in an obscure journal. The blue bar indicates the percentage of journals in Medline that has a lower article influence score. So that's from a well-known group that does citation metrics. And they're called eigenfactor.org. And they have various citation metrics. And it's not one that I have used a great deal, but Jane feels that it's a good measure. But before you use any of these citation metrics, even impact factor, understand what it means. Because impact factor, just like article influence or any other citation metric, has a purpose, but it does not necessarily represent all of the impact an article can have.
On that topic, we have a follow-up question, which is, what is the difference between article influence values and impact factor?
I have no idea, because as I was reading that, I was thinking this is impact factor. Yeah. Now, impact factor is a measure of 2 years. So it is that may be the difference. I'm not sure, and I don't want you to quote me on that. What I will do is I will follow up on that question, because I thought it was the same thing too.
Impact factor is kind of a quirky. I mean, all of them have their strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. Sometimes you have a 2-year impact factor. Sometimes you have a 5-year impact factor. Yeah. It's a reflection of the number of citations from a given journal. In the past, sort of chunk of time, several years of time.
Yeah, and sometimes the easiest way to really understand a citation metric is to find out how it was calculated. Mm-hmm. And so when we look at these impact factors or alternative bibliometrics is becoming much more popular, and it's something we will go into maybe in another webinar, is looking at how it's cited in even social media. So impact can be measured in so many different ways. So in today's day and age, impact factor is important, but it is not, or article influence, as maybe this is referring to it. But it's not the only way we can measure the aspect of why we should publish in a journal.
Absolutely, yeah. And some of the PLOS journals now are not using impact factor anymore. They're only using the alternative metrics.
Yes. Yes.
And I think impact factor also is influenced by views of the article and not just citations of the article.
Right. And even I showed you H index. So I think I have an H index of 9 or 12. It's probably 9, but I would prefer it to be 12, which means that at least 9 articles I've published have been cited 9 times or more. Well, that's helpful, but for my profile and understanding my impact. But that's not the only way I've impacted the research in my field. The way that it's presented in conferences, or it's on Twitter, or so there's also how my colleagues are then sharing my content. So there's different ways for us to have impact, and it's not as simple as it was before our information age sped up.
Yeah, that's right. Good point.
We have one more question,
sure.
Ella, which is understanding that the calculations definitely vary. The question is it true that generally high impact factors just indicate a good journal?
I would say in general, yes, and I would say it's still the most important consideration in the quality or tier of a journal. It's still, I would say, the most embraced and the most recognized metric, even though the newer metrics are definitely on the horizon and even being used right now. So a journal like Jama or Nature has an impact factor of 44 or 40 or something like that. And some of the smaller journals could have an impact factor of like 1.2. And so in general, I would say yes, it is a good indicator. And probably still our most recognized and valued indicator in the scientific publishing and academic publishing. I would say yes, to make that answer very simple.
Yeah, and that being said, just remember that impact factor is a measure of how articles are cited in other research articles. So that's how it's calculated, and that's the only way that it is calculated of how the journal, or is the work from the journal is cited in other publications. So I would always, there's actually a lot of controversy in information science, and this, over impact factor versus not. And I'd be happy, and I know you would be too, to share some of the research articles on this if people are interested to learn more.
Definitely. It's a very flawed metric in a lot of ways.
But is it a good litmus test?
It's a good litmus test. I would say yes. I would say it's a flawed metric, and there's been a lot of critiques about it, but it's still, I don't say it's the only game in town, but it's the most important game in town. Just that's the reality of the situation. That's how people judge.
And it's how journals advertise themselves and market themselves. But again, let us remember that an impact factor for a Nature of 44 cannot be compared to an impact factor of 5 for a OB-GYN journal. For an OBGYN journal, impact of factor of 5 is actually excellent.
And you have to understand with the narrower journals, I want to connect this back to what Dr. Smith said earlier, is submitting your work to a narrower journal like Contraception as opposed to Jama or Nature is going to be beneficial for many reasons. First of all, your work will be viewed by others in your field. Your work will be viewed by people who can actually do something useful with the information they learned from your research. You're going to get a better peer review because the people who are peer reviewers for a more specific journal are going to have greater knowledge. You get a better peer review, you're going to be able to produce a better paper because they're going to give you advice on how to improve that paper. There's a lot of, and you'll also be able to build a reputation. If you're publishing in, the more narrower journals that are read by people in your field. So I think there's a lot of advantages to publishing in narrower journals that just almost by definition are going to have smaller impact factors because they're narrower.
And another aspect is publishing in an open access journal, particularly ones that have reasonable or waived article processing fees that I think would be more appropriate. But the issue is, what is it that you are trying to accomplish with your research? Do you want it to reach a certain population? Well, frankly, JAMA may have a high impact factor, but it's not necessarily accessible by all of the researchers that you may want it to be want it to be highlighted with. So I think impact factor is something to consider and significantly, but at the same time, think about your audience and who is going to be citing your work. If it's on malaria, a researcher in Midwest United States is not going to be citing your work because there is no malaria issues in that geographic region. So we want to also think about aspects of who we want our research to reach.
Yeah, good point. So this kind of connects with this next slide. Something I hear from participants a lot. So they used several strategies to come up with a list of potential journals. So the list may include very competitive journals like the New England Journal of Medicine, as well as journals that are much less, I would say, lower tiered, and you can substitute lower impact factor for that. How can I judge what quality or level journal to send my paper to? And I will say that there's no easy way, there's no cut and dried sort of strategy for you to assess this as a junior investigator. The appropriate tier journal is really related to the quality of the methods and the data, as well as the impact and novelty of the research. And it does take time and experience to learn this part, and that's part of becoming more seasoned as a researcher. So if you're a new researcher or a junior researcher, I would say another important step in choosing a journal is to really consult with your mentor or your senior co-authors who have experience and can help guide your decision as well. So this really isn't just a data-driven kind of decision. Exactly. Those tools can help you come up with ideas, but one strategy would be to come up with a potential list of journals and then bring that to some of your senior co-authors and ask their opinion as well. Additional considerations for choosing a journal. Again, I did sort of mention this. Who do you most want or need to reach with your findings? Like, who can make the best use of the information? Again, that's something we've touched on already. And thinking about the audience. Another important consideration is, what will reviewers and readers consider a strength? So you may be doing research on, vaping in pregnant women. I just came up with that example sort of off the top of my head.
It's a great study.
But if you are submitting this study to a tobacco journal, and when I say vaping, I'm talking about electronic cigarettes. If you submit this paper to a tobacco journal, the first thing they're going to do is open the paper and look at the methods and look at how you measured the tobacco part, the vaping, the electronic cigarette use. If you were to submit it to a pregnancy-oriented journal, they're not going to focus on that measurement as much. They're going to focus on the pregnancy-related measurements and methods that you used. And so if you have a particular weakness, and every study has strengths and weaknesses, consider what the reviewers are going to really scrutinize at that journal and what they're not going to be able to scrutinize as much.
I would say also, if you are, let's say you submit to the tobacco journal and then they don't know they had a great paper and turn it down, consider the manuscript and consider maybe taking it in rewriting in a different way that would be attractive to the OB-GYN journal.
That's right. And I think what you're really speaking to is writing to your audience and tailoring your work to your audience, which is so important. And it's an art unto itself. So these two bullets are really linked. Thinking about the reviewers, you know what the reviewer's expertise is going to be based on the journal. So really think about that and in the context of the strengths and weaknesses of your study and your paper. Think about your timeline. As Preet mentioned, many, but not all journals publish on their website the time to from submission to publication or from acceptance to publication. And so you can get that information. Sometimes you have the luxury of having a little bit more time to start, aim higher and build in takes a little more time. If you're going to aim really high, it might take a little more time to publish because you could get rejected and then have to sort of reframe the paper, submit it to another journal, etc. And all of us go through this as researchers. We all get rejected and have to regroup. I usually give myself a day to feel depressed after I get rejected. And then I go to my plan B, reframe the paper and resubmit it to my next journal. But if you're really under the gun, I maybe wouldn't aim quite as high. And I would also look at the timeline that the journal, some journals take much longer. And it's also true that the really high tier journals, my husband, who's also a researcher, claims to have been rejected by the journal Nature in 12 minutes.
Wow!
Yeah,
you should write an article about
it. No human being was reading that article. But it is true that the higher tier journals have more staff and more money, and they process your article more quickly. Oftentimes, a journal like PLOS ONE, and I'm a reviewer, I'm an editor at PLOS ONE, will take a little bit longer. So just understanding what kind of timeline you're probably looking at when you think about the journal that you're submitting to can be helpful in matching that to your own needs.
And some journals, I think some of the smaller journals can be a valuable learning experience too, because sometimes the editors, there's more hands-on as opposed to some of the larger journals where there's not a hands-on, like, and how, what do you think of this, and how, and this would make the paper better, and so it really depends also what your purpose is. If you're an early career author, you may not, Jama may not be your first choice. You might want to go for something, you want to start building your publishing,
for sure.
Experience. So,
of course, impact factor, and that is, as Preet mentioned, a whole discussion in and of itself. There's a lot to be said and thought about with impact factor, but the bottom line is, even if it's not perfect, it does align well with quality of a journal. So it's a good thing to be aware of. And to think about as you're choosing your journal.
Some journals request us to inform them of reviewers of submitted articles from our institution. Others are fast responding with feedback within 24 hours. Others publish with minor revisions without publication fees, and there's just generally a lot of variation. Could you say something about this kind of variation in these issues?
Well, it's such an individual thing. It's hard to
hard to predict, and it's hard to know in advance just by looking at the journal website. It's hard to know all that information. That's probably not going to be something that's very transparent as you're trying to find a target journal. It's something you probably learn from experience. And so again, that could be something that you talk with your co-authors, senior co-authors or mentors or colleagues with to find out if they have experience submitting to a particular journal and what, for those particular issues.
And some journals are more transparent than others. So some of them will write the time. I was reading a journal article a couple of days ago that actually published its peer review process. So I could see the email between the submitters. Of course, the email addresses were blocked out, but it was like, this is the article at submission. These were the recommendations made by the peer review. So, and
all of the BMC journals.
The BMC journals do that. So, if you want to go into the Pubmed Central journals and see exactly what was submitted, what was recommended, that is really intriguing, actually, to see how that goes about. And so there's so many aspects to this, and it's not something that we're trying to share it in a very short period of time. But I want to emphasize what we said at the very beginning, that this is an introduction. And also, you have more questions. You're gonna address those.
The last question I have so far, anyway, in the chat is: are there any particular journals you would recommend as the best for PhD dissertations?
I would say it really depends on the topic. The topic, rather than the type of manuscript it is in that regard. I would say it depends on what the study's about.
Yeah, I think absolutely the very first thing is it's topic driven.
And kind of related to that, to my knowledge, I don't know any journals that would publish a dissertation in dissertation format. It has to be adapted for
that's a very good point. Format. Thank you for saying that.
Yes. So the dissertation would not be published, but you may get 3 or 4 articles out of a dissertation.
I'll just add that the PLOS One in particular does not judge papers on novelty, only on the quality of the methods. So if the methods are appropriate and intact and there's not a big flaw in the methods, it should get published in PLOS One. So that's something to consider. If you're doing the type of research maybe that's been done before, maybe in a different area, even in a different area of the country that you're working in, or your paper isn't like super novel, but it's a high quality paper and it was done with appropriate methods, consider PLOS One, and there's plenty of my colleagues in my department who publish there. It's a quality journal, but that could be, that's an option for people. It does take, I would say, a little bit longer. The vision around PLOS One was that they would be publishing things quickly, but, I would say probably that hasn't come to fruition. It tends to be a little bit longer in most cases. But that's something, that's a kind of a new concept, I think, in publishing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That, I don't know, do you know, is there any other journals that don't consider novelty?
I think all journals are going to consider,
except for PLOS One.
Yeah. It's going to be one of the aspects. It's not going, all journals have their own way of doing things, or Pubmed Central being more of a collection of journals may have a policy, like a general policy, and then specific to topic. Something else that, as we are living in the electronic age, you will note that, and you may have noticed this yourself, is as sometimes there is online-only supplements for journals, and some journals will require you to put your data sets in an accessible public repository. And this is becoming more common. I believe PLOS One makes it, is one of those, especially the open access journals. They just don't want, not all of them, but some of them don't only want the article to be open access, they sometimes want to have the data set available open access. So you may see that. In others, supplements, online supplements, may to a journal article. And if you see this in a journal article, like link, online link supplement only, you may see additional figures, or you may see additional data visualizations or tables. So for instance, I work with scoping reviews and systematic reviews. So, and in those, of course, the search strategy is the method. So those often are published as a supplement, and you can see how the different databases were searched and the different search strategies utilized for systematic or scoping reviews. So there's a lot of aspects when we think about, right now we are in an exciting and a little terrifying time in scholarly publishing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, and this is a topic that we could have a, 7-day conference about, or longer. It's scholarly publishing. We're like, let's do a session on scholarly publishing.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you like a few more questions, or do you want to respond?
Sure. I mean,
yeah. We can hold the next section to another time, and they have the slides for that. So.
We have a question from Helen at University of Rwanda, which is, could you explain more about the H index? For example, what does a 92 H index mean?
Okay, so I'm going to actually go, 92 means that at least 92 articles, and I'm actually going to go into Scopus because I think they do a good job of answering that. And as you're doing that, do you mind going over it?
I was just going to say, one of the things that distinguishes impact factor from H index is impact factor is a metric of how frequently any article within a journal was cited. So it could be that one article in Jama was cited 10,000 times. It doesn't matter how many articles were cited within the particular journal. As long as one article was cited from that journal, that counts as a journal citation for that journal. So H index, I think, is a more article level metric. Is that correct?
It's an article, but it's also an individual level. So a person can have an H index.
Okay.
So a journal, and yes, it can be. It's not article level because it's about the number of articles.
It's research.
Right.
Okay.
So when we're looking at H index, and I'm just going into SciMago because I think this is a free resource, and I want to go into some of the help section that kind of gives us some information here. And so I'm going to click on what they have for H index here. In SciMago, the same, I went into the About Us section of the information there. I'm just going to read the definition. The H index expresses the journal's number of articles that have been received at least H citations. So it quantifies both the journal's scientific productivity and the scientific impact. It also is applicable to scientists, countries, etc. The way I always think about it is it means that having an H index of 92 means that if you're a researcher, at least 92 of your articles have been cited 92 times or more. So let me repeat that.
Have been cited at least once each? Is that what you mean?
No, I mean 92. So for instance, if I have an H index of 9, 9 articles of mine have been cited at least 9 times or more each. Okay. So here, and if apparently they link to a Wikipedia definition, which is never Let's take a look at what they have to say. And so I think of it is an author level. It can also be a journal level one. And you can go into more definition. And I do believe the Wikipedia definition is not inappropriate. I do think that it can be strong. But for me, what I like to do is I think of it as, and you can look at it here in a visual version. These are the number of citations. And you can also see the calculation if you're crazy enough to actually understand that. I am not. But really, that's the way I see it, is it measures both productivity and citation impact. And I don't know if that's very helpful, but it's the maximum value of H such that a given author has published H papers that have each been cited at least H times. So if yours is, we do have people who have a H index of 100. There are people like that out there. Not me. I'm sorry to say, I don't know if it's you either, my friend.
Give it a few years.
Give it a few years. But
Change your name.
They have
That's helpful.
100, or first of all, they have to have at least published 100 articles, which,
Right.
that is in itself.
Yeah, in itself, it's quite an accomplishment.
Again, this is over time, remember? So my H index, I've been publishing in the last 20 years. My H index is, I can't remember, it's 9 or 12 or something like that, which means that, well, let's go with the 12 just because it sounds better.
Yeah.
So it just means that at least 12 of the articles I have published, of the, I think, 19 or 20, have been cited 12 times or more. We can all, would anyone like to see Dr. Smith's H index?
I'm afraid to know it.
Would you like to take a look at it? I'm just joking. I'm joking. Yeah.
I'm sure it's impressive. But
yeah, I'm
just
joking.
in the interest of time.
Yeah.
I have a question. Please, could you explain again the impact factor? The impact factor, I didn't get it very well.
Yeah, okay, so the impact factor, I would say the most common one is a 5-year impact factor that journals use. But regardless, impact factor is then in the numerator, it's the number of citations from a given journal. And in the denominator is the number of articles from that journal. So it's essentially, it is a reflection of the number of citations from a given journal, or the proportion of citations of a given journal based on how many articles there are from that journal. So it's a measure of citation frequency. So basically, in plainer language, it's how much a journal's articles are getting cited in other academic papers. So you can imagine, you know how long it takes to publish a paper, right? You can imagine that it takes a while to accrue this metric, because you have to wait till your paper gets published, people read it, and then people are citing it in their own papers, and then you have to wait until those papers get published. So it takes a little while for that to accrue.
And I'm actually trying to pull up a good definition.
I have a really nice slide of it.
It's not specific to
an article.
An article
No.
or a researcher. It
Right.
belongs to
The journal.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. It's a journal level.
So new journals will be lower.
That's right, and that's why they also, sometimes you will see the 2-year, or sometimes you'll see the 5-year.
Well, a journal's impact factor will not be measured until it's been in publication for 2 years.
Okay.
But it will still be lower.
Yeah, that's right. It takes a while. But it doesn't say anything about the quality of an article. Yeah, so I guess it can be helpful in choosing a journal, but not necessarily in reflecting the importance of a particular piece of research.
I'm just going to skip through these slides very quickly, and I'm not going to address them right now. I just wanted to skip through these slides on predatory publishing an article for reading, and just some really basic steps on what it is. And this is a predatory publishing email that I received. First of all, that's not my real name, and I have no eminence or contribution to the area of nursing and health. But I receive these all the time, and as do you. So just some things to think about. And again, not a very long piece, but we can always go through it again. But I really wanted to get to this final slide where I wish you all a happy Halloween.
Thank you both for providing such a very informative overview of a topic which is clearly of relevance and importance to many people.